We'll be live in just a tick. There's a green light. That means we're live. Good evening. It is Sunday evening, May 17th. I had to double check. Of course, I could have been sneakier about it. I've got a calendar over there, too. But we've got a retired law enforcement officer who happens to be family. This is Cameron's dad, Rick Anderson. And we're going to have a conversation. Guys, let me preface this a little bit. I am sick to death of talking about and hearing about the Arbery case.
The hate crime that wasn't.
And it's another hate crime hoax, no different than Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, or Juicy Smollett, Juicy Smoulier.
Because downtown Chicago is totally MAGA country.
Roger that. So, but we're gonna have ourselves a little chit chat, and oh hey, we've already got Danielle's watching with us. Good evening, sunshine. I'm glad you could join us. Don't you have a show to do in like 2 hours? Anyway, so we're gonna talk a little bit about that case, and we're not gonna talk so much about the case itself. A lot of the buzz around the Arbery case has to do with what is citizen's arrest. Was this a case where citizen's arrest was adequately in claim to defer a felony murder charge to something more akin to a self-defense charge? And just a little on the top end, something to understand about citizen's arrest, and one of the big things that we're going to talk to Mr. Anderson about are going to be what exactly are the citizen's arrest powers of a person. But broadly, it's important to understand also that citizen's arrest is not something that, it's not an authority that is ceded to the citizens by the government through the law. It is an authority that is understood to be retained by the citizens under English common law. And in the state of Georgia, we have a law on the books about citizen's arrest, which works kind of like stand your ground castle type law. It doesn't give you the right to self-defense. It doesn't give you the right or the authority to conduct a citizen's arrest, but rather, assuming certain extreme circumstances are met with within the citizen's arrest, it makes you immune from prosecution based on negative outcomes. So in the case that you have to conduct a citizen's arrest, and it goes badly the way this one apparently did, well, the statute in Georgia says you can claim self-defense if the person who was suspected of a crime tried to hurt you, and a person who is in the process of committing a felony cannot use self-defense as a defense if they cause harm or kill you. So the thing to understand about the law in Georgia that way, and we're going to dig into it deep here in just a second, is the law on citizen's arrest in the state of Georgia, and most laws where it exists, much like the Castle Doctrine or stand your ground laws, it does not give you an authority that you would not otherwise have. It bolsters your immunity in the event that you have to employ your actual rights as a citizen. Is that a fair summary?
That is well stated.
All right.
So just so everybody knows, this is my dad. Well, Chris's dad has been on the stream a couple of times. This is my father's first appearance. He's recently retired, LEO from DeKalb County. And so, Dad, if we could just back up, you could talk about your experience and all that, please.
All right. I spent 23 years at DeKalb County. Last 10 years as a sergeant. I worked primarily East Precinct and Tucker Precinct. And all of my experience is the street cop, as it were. You call 911, I'm the guy that shows up. You're in an accident, I'm the guy that shows up. And then as a sergeant, of course, I supervised the troops themselves. And then if you weren't happy with your officer and you had to call for a supervisor, then that's me. I'm the guy that shows up. That's a quick summary of who I am.
All right. Would you define arrest powers for us, please, and what the differences between the cops and the citizens are in the state of Georgia.
The primary differences, as far as arrest rights is concerned, is a police officer can enforce traffic law and can take people to jail. But the criteria for making an arrest itself remain the same for officers as for citizens. So a citizen has the right to make an arrest a citizen's arrest, under the same circumstances as a police officer himself would.
So, specifically about this situation, there are a lot of people, their primary point of argument is that the McMichaels, the father and son, had no immediate knowledge of a felony or anything like that. And because they had no immediate knowledge of the felony, their citizen's arrest is completely invalid. They had no right to try and detain Arbery until the cops got there.
That's not the way the law is in Georgia. They did have at least reasonable articulable suspicion that he was involved in criminal activity, and you can therefore detain them until police arrive.
So what meets the threshold of reasonable suspicion?
Reasonable suspicion, simply put, is that which would give a reasonable person to believe, lead a reasonable person to believe that a crime has occurred.
So let's just say, hypothetically, you happen to catch somebody trespassing on a construction site, and as soon as you said, "Hey, buddy," they took off running. Does that qualify as reasonable suspicion?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay, let me jump in there real quick. What is the difference between a misdemeanor trespassing and felony trespassing?
There are several things that this is a real fine point in the law. It depends on, did they commit damage while they were there? Are they just on the property? Were they trying to steal? But just being there at a closed business or in unreasonable time, if it were 2 o'clock in the morning, then obviously something's not right. But being there without a lawful purpose on property that does not belong to you, or closed business, even if it's public property, will constitute at least misdemeanor criminal trespass.
Now, is it true?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Cameron. Is it true what many of the, I guess, pro-Arbery, the lefties keep saying? Well, there was no trespass. There was no trespassing sign, so he wasn't even actually trespassing. I find that, and you mentioned businesses and reasonable business hours. Of course, in this case, we're not talking about a business. We're talking about private residence under construction, under remodel. And I assume that there's a substantial difference in the law when you're talking about a business that's normally open to the public versus a private residence, which is never technically open to the public.
That's correct. That's complete private property. And if it isn't your private property, you know whether or not you have permission to be there.
So the fact that the house is in basically a half-finished state, and apparently the garage is just open and you can enter the premises, that doesn't really matter. It is reasonable to assume you should know whether or not it's okay for you to walk in and out of that garage.
That's correct. If there are some exceptions, like you're going to make a delivery, to walk up on somebody's carport or into somebody's open garage. But once again, you should know whether or not you have permission to be on that property or a legitimate purpose for being on that property.
Okay, real quick. Your daughter-in-law says hello.
Hello.
He loves me.
Yes, he loves you.
Yes, he does.
Okay. All right. Now, the Arbery's family, they claim that, he was a fitness buff. He liked to jog. He played high school football. and that he liked to jog in the neighborhoods in the surrounding area. And what he had probably done is gone into this house to try and find a drink of water. How does that track?
In the middle of the night, several times previously on multiple occasions.
Well, yes.
Without a flashlight or reflective equipment.
Yeah,
obviously, that will never pass the smell test.
So even though this particular incident happened in the middle of the day and he was supposedly jogging, even though the security footage shows him walking up to the house, even the thing about, it's South Georgia and I was out running and it was hot, so I thought maybe I could get a drink of water out of this remodel. That doesn't pass the smell test.
No way. What reasonable person is going to do that? And you're back to the reasonable man doctrine. That's who's going to go wandering up on some piece of property they're not familiar with. They don't know anybody. They have no permission to be there. Oh, I think I'll take a drink out of their water hose. That's just not very smart.
All right. So
also, even a dump sink in a garage is a pretty rare find.
True.
Okay. So there's a lot of back and forth about how the police department in that area is highly corrupt. Apparently, the DA was in on it. The other cops were in on it. And that basically the McMichaels were a couple of pieces of shit. And they helped cover this up because, of course, white Southern cops are racist, bigoted assholes and whatnot.
Yes, and it is never racist to assume, based solely on the color of a person's skin, that a white man is racist.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Typical left-wing spin. When the last card to play, when you don't have anything else to play, you got nothing to play the race card if it works. And boy, does it get played.
Fair enough. Okay. So, man, Dad, that was funny. You made me lose my train of thought for a second there. Okay. But I'm going to get it back.
I don't think he was trying to make a joke there, brother.
Sadly, correct. I was not.
Oh, okay. So, there's a police officer, Officer Rash. We don't know anything other than that his name is Officer Rash. He sent the homeowner a text message. The homeowner's name is English. So he sent Mr. English a text message that said, hey, there's this guy, McMichael. He lives literally, like 3 houses down from you. He's retired LEO. If your cameras that are motion activated go off again, please call him. He said he will answer the phone day or night. Why would a police officer lean on somebody that's basically not a cop anymore for reasons other than some type of corruption or cover up or whatever? Help us make that make sense.
Well, it's almost impossible for the police officers to do their job without help from the public. We can't be everywhere. We can't see everything at once. Often the things that some private citizen will observe can make a huge difference in an ability to solve a crime, particularly a property crime where there's, some kind of damage or theft involved. Obviously, the police weren't there to witness it, or an arrest would have been made at that time. So input from private citizens is critical for the police to be able to do their job.
Okay. Now you talk about theft or property damage. One of the things that many people have argued is because there's no evidence that Ahmaud Arbery stole anything or broke anything, means he didn't commit a felony, so the citizen's arrest is invalid on the face of it. Now, obviously, it's real hard to go back and prove his intent now that he's dead, but I've also heard people make the argument that this is sort of like the difference between murder and attempted murder. attempted murder is still basically a murder charge because you were attempting to murder somebody. So you can actually be guilty of felony trespass if you trespassed with the intent to steal or break something. Does that track with your experience?
You could be if you could prove that. I guess the bottom line in this is he was certainly guilty of at least misdemeanor criminal trespass, which is arrestable. Generally, in a situation like that where a police officer is involved, they would have you sign what's called a criminal trespass form, particularly if it was a misdemeanor trespass. They'd have to go before a judge and explain, what are you doing there? And then the judge would make the determination as to fine or jail time or whatever the penalty was. But if you're on somebody else's property, you need a legitimate reason to be there or permission.
So even if there are no trespassing signs up, the fact that he appears to have gone in and out of this building at least 3 times, 2 of those times at night, even if it's just
correct. The signs are just an affirmative defense. It just is. You don't have to have the signs. It's a big help, but it's not requirement. It doesn't mean, oh, no signs. Hey, I can go into anybody's house and do anything I want.
Like the sign that I have outside that says, "Trespassers will be shot, survivors will be prostituted."
So what's different about this than a neighborhood where half the houses are still under construction and people routinely walk the houses and check them out and look at the floor plans and stuff like that?
Those people are criminals.
Technically, that's criminal trespass. But you're right. That type of thing is routinely done. But there's a risk involved in doing it, particularly if there's been theft involved. You might be walking around looking at something and the police show up and want an explanation for what you're doing here. I hope you really are shopping for a house.
And Rick, you working in DeKalb County especially, I imagine you dealt with quite a few cases where materials and tools and the like went missing from construction sites. I used to do a lot of construction work, industrial and commercial electrical work, and one case in particular, there's the Johnny Carino's Country Italian restaurant up by what used to be Discover Mills, that big mall up in Gwinnett County. I built that restaurant with General Controls Incorporated. We came to the site one day, and a couple of 100 feet, maybe 1,000 feet of braided copper wire. We're talking 200-300 pounds of braided copper wire had been just cut off at the slab and towed it off in the middle of the night. That's not just, oh, hey, we're out that money. It's no, because then you got to replace that wire. All the wire they left behind is useless now, and you got to charge somebody for the labor. The insurance company's going to get soaked on it. But that's something that happens quite frequently.
Yes, sadly that's true. Particularly copper theft was big business for a while. Mm-hmm. Terrible to try to stay on top of, and very destructive, particularly if a house was under construction or abandoned. It was nothing to have a situation where all the copper pipe had been cut out, and of course tear up anything and everything they could get to just to get the pipe out.
All right, so with what we know now, unless some massive piece of information comes out, because there's a lot of things that people are pointing to in this case, that the first DA recused himself but explained in a letter in their opinion that this was a clean shoot, and then the second DA recused themselves and explained in a letter that they felt like this was a clean shoot. And it was finally the third DA and mounting public pressure. I mean, you've got the mayor of Atlanta commenting on this case. You've got the governor of the state commenting on this case. You've got Joe Biden commenting on this case. You've got President Trump commenting on this case. From the outside looking in, it really looks like that this arrest was made for largely political reasons. People are trying to, maintain optics. But if you can kind of peel back all of your emotional responses and just look at things as they lie, does it seem reasonable to assume that what happened here is that this was a neighbor trying to look out for a neighbor, and it ended up being a citizen's arrest that went bad?
That's what it appears to be for me. The only factor race played in this that I can see is that it was part of the description of the suspect. That's it.
All right. So if there's anything that you would want to add to this, that you would want to tell people, because I'll tell you where I'm coming from, and I've stated it on our show multiple times. I am coming to the point to where I really hate these sorts of stories. I think in particular, the Mike Brown incident was one of the most divisive things that ever happened on a social level in our country. Because even now, to this day, there are people that believe sincerely that Mike Brown was executed while he had his hands up and he was begging for his life. But then if you actually, know anything about what happened, that's not what happened. So
not just executed while he had his hands up, begging for his life, but unprovoked. The narrative that those people believe is that Mike Brown had not even done anything to justify the police officer speaking to him to begin with. That this cop was just a terrible white supremacist who wanted to murder a black man, and just Mike Brown happened to be the random one that he chose. And obviously that's just not the case. That's no more the case than the idea that Arbery was just a jogger.
Yeah, so if there's anything that you would want to tell people, that when future stories like this come out, like, what are some things to look for, to pay attention to? Because it's real easy to watch the video and go, holy shit, you just saw these good old boys in a pickup truck gun this guy down. That's a deliberate, manipulated emotional reaction. What would you want to tell people to think about, look for, whatever, so that these things are not divisive in the future?
Well, be very skeptical. Obviously, the agenda of the left is to deliberately divide. Can you imagine what could be accomplished if whites and blacks didn't have this division? How much government would we really need? How many of these people who make money from this kind of stuff would be listened to or needed? What could be accomplished if we truly understood we're on the same page? Because most of us are. The rest of this is all manipulation. If you look at history, in 1920, the Klan could draw 50,000 people in New York City. Today, they can't draw 50 people in Rednecksville. And even if they try to hold something somewhere, there's more protesters than Klansmen. It's ridiculous to think that we haven't progressed amazingly. Just what I've seen in my own lifetime. We've come light years. This is not 1920, and people aren't sought out and shot for being black, and they're not attacked for being black. And I have seen this in my own experience where, this person was stopped just because they're black. Let me explain something to you about when police officers make traffic stops, for example. It is rare, unless you're in broad daylight and circumstances are just right, when you're going to conduct a traffic stop, that you know very much about the race or sex of what you're stopping when you decide to make that stop. Because a car commits a traffic violation, and now you decide you're going to initiate a traffic stop. Now, you add darkness, rain, any other things to come into that very often, and police radio traffic can confirm this. As they put out their radio traffic over the air, they're lucky if they can tell the dispatcher how many people are even in the car, much less race and sex. So It's just a misnomer that they're targeted specifically on race. Now, this doesn't mean you can't find some racist somewhere, because I'm sure you can. But as a general rule, it's extremely rare, and I'm going to tell you, police officers hate it. It's very divisive. Blacks and whites have to depend on each other for their lives out there on those streets. And the last thing we need is people trying to turn us against each other. And occasionally that happens even inside the ranks. Where I worked, it was extremely rare. I'm very proud to work with the people I did and the way they behaved and the way they conducted themselves. And we really didn't have that, not amongst the rank and file.
I actually want to just tag that briefly, because DeKalb County has a reputation for being just
Special.
a smidge corrupt, just a wee teeny bit. But for the most part, how would you describe the people that you dealt with that were outside of the command structures?
No, hold on before you answer that question. There's something I want to add to what you were saying about how it doesn't happen. We can take pretty serious confidence that just random evil white supremacists running around gunning down and murdering random black people without provocation is not a thing which is an occurrence, because as we can see from the Arbery case, that is the story that the American media wants to tell you. If it were the case that that was happening ever, let alone with any frequency, that would be the only headline we ever read.
Oh yeah,
Not.
You're right.
So a case like this being so wide ranging and so controversial and so loud and so in your face tells you that this case is special. And it's special because it is a case that doesn't occur often. In fact, it occurs so infrequently that it is not unreasonable to say it efficiently does not occur.
I would agree with that. And yet, nobody talked about polar bear hunting, and it's a legit thing. So, yeah, they have the media has an agenda, and sadly, it's not.
Whoa! Time out. Is polar bear hunting what I think it is?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same
on
question.
The internet about polar bear hunting. Yes, it's also referred to as the knockout game. But the targets of this game are specific.
Okay, fair enough.
I have never heard the knockout game referred to as polar bear hunting.
That's a new one. Thanks. And I know I asked you the one question, but I actually want to leapfrog over to something else real quick. Most people do not know that it was actually the McMichaels that requested that this video get leaked. They felt like that it would exonerate them, that as soon as people saw Arbery charge and attack a man holding a shotgun, they would understand that this was clear-cut self-defense, castle doctrine, stand your ground all the way, up and down. And let's go back and remember that Gregory McMichael had literal 3.5 decades of LEO experience. He was a beat cop and he was an investigator for the DA's office. What law enforcement officer is going to deliberately release damning data on themselves? Seriously, how much sense does that not make for you to deliberately convict yourself in the court of public opinion long before any of this other legal stuff happens? You would think that if anybody knew how to beat the system, a guy with that amount of experience would know how to beat the system. So does that track with you that it's really inconsistent, that the fact that this video exists, that it was voluntarily surrendered to the police and then was voluntarily released to the public? At what point can we point to that and say, look, a cop who's guilty of murder, who understands murder requires intent, is not going to do these things. Could you just speak to that briefly?
Certainly not. And if there had been a history of racism with a guy who's been a cop 30 years, first of all, he never would have made it 30 years. But we'd know about it. I question the sanity of anybody who deliberately charges someone holding a shotgun. What are you thinking? It's just not a normal or what I would call sane act, particularly at any distance or when you have the option to go the other way. That's what most people do.
It's what I would do. What happens when guys with guns roll up? I run away. You can't outdraw somebody that's already got their firearm out. Like, you just can't.
Yeah, none of that part of it passes the smell test either. This is, yeah. One of the things that trained police officers have to deal with is anytime somebody charges at you, if they put their hands on your weapon, that's what we refer to as threat level 5. Deadly force is authorized.
Well, because
the other factors involved in then can come into play, but we've all seen cases in the media where, well, this person was shot, it wasn't armed. Can an unarmed person hurt you or kill you? You better believe it, especially depending on their level of training. So charging an armed person is not a sane act. So,
yeah. One of the things that I've maintained is as soon as Arbery laid a finger on the gun, he was no longer unarmed. It goes back to something that happened in the Trayvon Martin case with George Zimmerman, where he described in detail how at one point in time in the fight, it was not his gun, it was the gun, and only one of them was going to control it at the end of that fist fight. So, and I guess it makes total sense, because you have to assume, okay, what's the only rational reason somebody would try and take my weapon away from me? Well, so they could use it against me. And that's what you refer to as threat level 5.
Oh, certainly. And police officers go through a lot of training in weapon retention, because sadly there are a lot of officers killed with their own guns. So most of us, we ain't gonna let you get our gun. It just ain't gonna happen. Okay, I'd rather die with it in my hand than have you take it away from me and kill me with my own gun. It's just not gonna happen.
Insults on top of injury. Okay, so if to put a button on this, because we've done ourselves a solid 30 minutes here, if we could circle back around to the thing I asked you about a few minutes ago, about DeKalb County having a reputation for corruption and all sorts of hinky business. Even if the county that these guys are from is a corrupt county, based on your obviously subjective experience coming from a county with a similar reputation, what would you say the odds are that the majority of the lower level cops are bad guys? And specifically what I'm asking you about is, I've heard you tell me more than once that from good cops all the way down to shit cops, the thing that all of you hate are bad cops, because they make your job so much harder.
Oh yeah, the majority of the force to be that, 0. It's no way. I'd call that impossible. I suspect it'd be hard to identify even a few. Now, there are always some people with some kind of racial animus, but just being mad at somebody too doesn't mean you're going to go kill them. How many times does somebody say, well, if you do that, I'll kill you, or I'm really mad, I'm going to kill you? Are they murderers? No. They're mad at something. So that's, even in those cases where somebody may make remarks that are less than pleasant or insulting, that doesn't necessarily mean they're some kind of rabid racist either. It means they were mad.
Gotcha. Well, Dad, I really appreciate it. This is something that Chris and I went out on a limb on early, and we went out on the limb because if we just look at the track record, literally 9 times out of 10, when the media trumpets this narrative, it's not actually the narrative that they trumpet. Very, very rarely does it end up being some white guy killed a black guy because white man bad. And this one in particular, oh, look, you got these fat, racist rednecks from Georgia driving their truck and they're going to go darky hunting. No, come on, come on. I was suspicious of this from the beginning for that exact reason, because the narrative was too perfect. So having you come on and explain citizens' arrest and arrest powers in general in real time, we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
All right. Well, I guess that's all we've got for you today. And
stop falling for the narrative.
Good God, yes.
Fuck, most of us don't really have that many things different from each other, people. We just want to go to work and raise our kids and eat our dinner and go to bed. That's what we all want.
If you're still watching the mainstream media, you're going to be angry, depressed, dejected, demoralized. You're going to think everybody's out to get you. Because
that the COVID's going to kill you.
Yeah, watch this instead. We're hilarious.
Yeah.
And honest.
Turn that crap off. I mean, you're not going to learn anything anyway.
All right. Well, guys, thanks for tuning in. It's been good doing. I love doing these little pop-up impromptu shows like this, and I'm glad y'all tuned in with us. So we will see y'all. Wow, I guess tomorrow morning. It's Sunday evening, isn't it? Y'all be safe out there. Oh, and I hope y'all caught the NASCAR race. First live sports back on since the beginning of COVID 1984. I hope y'all enjoyed that, and we'll see you tomorrow morning for the Meme War Monday. Y'all be safe. Good night. There's the whoosh. Got to get the whoosh.
All right, Dad.
Almost off.